Hey everyone, welcome to the transmission for Gene Key 51 and 2 days before the eclipse. That's what we're talking about right here. So Gene Key 51 is an integral part of this eclipse. How so? Well, that is where the sun is shining, and therefore the moon, because the moon and the sun are conjunct in a new moon. And then we have Chiron, the wounded healer. We have Venus and Mercury and the North Node all in Aries. So Gene Key 51 is amplified because of its position in this solar eclipse new moon. So let's unpack this and discover what could be possible for the next 24 hours before the eclipse as I'm recording this and beyond, because we know that eclipse energy lasts for weeks. And we know that this eclipse will really be working on us until the next Aries eclipse in 2025. So it's just deep. It's pervasive. It's deep. So the shadow is agitation. The gift is initiation. And the city is awakening. So this gives us an insight into the energies of right now. And this is the gene key in human design that's associated with shock. So that agitation, let's unpack agitation for a moment, because this agitation has different flavors to it. And the underlying belief that creates physical agitation is the fear that we are not in control. And we're not in control, and we fucking know it at some deep level. Even if we regiment our days, even if we micromanage everything, or we're really good at being in the conversation, if we're on top of our schedules and we don't allow chaos too much to work our lives, we still know. And even if we're on the opposite end of the spectrum, where we're just super chaotic, we might have this feeling that we're so out of control that I have to surrender to it because I have no control. So isn't it interesting that these gene keys play on the juxtaposition of the polarities, having so much control, not feeling like I'm in any control. And the truth is, we have control over certain things in our lives, and we do not have control over the big picture of our lives. And yet we can ask ourselves, who is the we that we're talking about? Who is the you that you're talking about? And that's the distinguishing characteristic in the transmission of the shadow. It's saying, once you know who you are and you've awakened to who you really are, there's an embodied sense of trust. You are aligned with life, and you are one with life. You no longer play the game of separation with life, and therefore the chaotic twists and turns of life are just life doing life. And you see your own self as a fractal of that consciousness in form. And this is something that we can put words to oftentimes, but we don't have the embodied sense of. And that's okay. There's no judgment there, but just notice how much is embodied. One of my teachers used to say that we can all talk the talk of enlightenment until we hit stress. And then as soon as we hit stress, we have a lower level default pattern. And he called that a defense style. And it's when we transcend our defense style, like we've really integrated the fears to the point, and that's that transcending, including and transcending. We've integrated the fears to a point where we can now be more fluid and more purposeful in the face of stress. Like it just doesn't unravel us like it did before. And that's one of the signs of how awakening works itself in your being. And that's really cool to have that marker. And I've noticed it in myself. The reactivity lessens the more that these teachings are integrated. So I see myself at one with life. And ultimately, the big fear of losing control is the big fear around death. And I've met people who say, oh, I'm not afraid of dying. Okay, but it's built into our human codes to be afraid of dying. It takes a tremendous spiritual consciousness, like crossing over, learning to get to the place where death isn't a thing, because the you who would die is not really the real you, physical body. And yet, as Mary Oliver says, to be human, we must do these three things: to love what is mortal, to hold it against our bones as if our life depends on it, and when the time comes to let go, to let go. So it's a both and. It's loving this life. It's playing full out. It's being in charge and in control of the things that you are here to be in control of, and not just so damn chaotic because you feel like you have no control. But on the other end, it's also loosening the control and allowing the flow of life through you. And that is what we call a yoga. Union with two opposites. I love that term, and I use that term outside of the exercise or physical practice of yoga, because the physical practice in a pose is yoga, because you are both strong and open, surrendered. There's a sweet spot there, and that's what the physical practice of yoga will help you understand in your body. That if you overdo it, it's tight, it's hard. If you underdo it, it's flabby, it's collapsing. And there's a sweet spot to it. And that's the sweet spot we're going to talk about here in Gene Key 51's transmission. So we're in an eclipse time, and it's highlighting these kinds of shocks. And shocks are coming through earthquakes. They're coming through environmental events. And those are well known among astrologers, that there's certain configurations for earthquakes, and we're in one of them. And indeed, earthquakes have been happening, but it's so on the outside, so on the inside. So we have internal earthquakes that are happening. And perhaps you're in one where your reality is being shifted. Maybe someone's dying in your world. Maybe it could be extreme, or it could be really that information is coming to light. It's been eclipsed, and it's coming to light for you to see your own shadow. And seeing our own shadow, seeing the things that are in the way of who we want to be, who we feel like we really are, is part of what an eclipse supports in releasing. And the shock is part of that. So in the human design, 851 is part of this shamanic channel. And this shamanic channel is this channel of shock, because shock is an initiation point. So shock can be a portal. And we've talked a lot about portals as we talk about this eclipse. This eclipse is a portal. This wormhole that we're in is a portal. Same. 51 is also a portal. So isn't that fascinating? That we really are being hit with this notion of portals. What are portals? They're entry points into a new reality. You remember The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe when you were growing up, the C.S. Lewis books, and they would open the closet and go in the closet. That was a portal. That's a wormhole to a whole other dimensional reality. And to realize that we actually live like that, but we are blinded. We have scales on our eyes, and we don't see the multidimensional nature, or we do, and that prevents us from even living here, because our doors of perception are so wide open. So our yoga is to be here in a physical body, because we are in the ring of humanity, but also open the doors of perception. And one of the ways that life does it is through the hero's journey, the Shiro's journey, the shock. So in the matrix of the map of consciousness, and some of you know that I love Gurdjieff and the map of consciousness, and I'll teach it again because it was over, let's see, June of 2023 when I gave my last transmission. But to go up a level in consciousness, so Gurdjieff named worlds, like we are in world 48. World 48 is the human world, the biosphere that we know, but it is not conscious. It can be cleaned up. It can be very artistic. It can be very, it can have manners and fluidity and be erudite and be scholarly and be intellectual, but it is not conscious. And that's one thing to really understand, that just because someone is very smart, that does not mean that they're conscious. It's a whole different thing. So what happens is, in order to become conscious, remember when you first were on the spiritual path and you start to awaken and become conscious, there is usually a shock point. What was it? Was it divorce? Was it death? Was it an illness? Something, was it abandonment? Something happened as a shock point, and that's gate 51 of the I Ching. That's what we're talking about here in this gene key. That shock is a portal, and it's a portal to initiation, which is ultimately a portal to awakening inside of this matrix called the gene keys. So let's remember that distinction as we're inside this eclipse wormhole, and we may be given these moments of like Uranian awakening, that thing that comes out of left field. Our body minds are aware that shit can happen, like the shoe can drop and it can come out of left field. There was a fire in Boulder at the end of, I believe, 2022. I used to live in Boulder, Colorado, and I saw after the fire had just devastated South Boulder, there was like a map, and some houses were still remaining on a block where, like in the cul-de-sac, 90% of the other houses were burned down. So in our psyches, we have this understanding that there is sometimes no rhyme or reason to why me, why my house, or why did my house get spared and the other person's house not be spared. And generations of people have known that from wars and from calamity and from just wild accidents. So inside our being, we carry that fear with us. But we can use that fear, and instead of turning it into competitive control, or as the gene keys say, very reckless behavior or very collapsed behavior, we could actually turn it into our favor, to use it as a portal of awakening. And how do we do that? Well, we sit in the stew of what is, and allow it to inform our being on the nature of reality. And I know that could sound really esoteric, but in my experience, I'll say when a shock hits, it hits viscerally. And so we must experience it viscerally and move it out of the body. We know that from trauma work. So when we freeze, we lock in trauma. When we move it and we use our throat and our voice, and when we cry, when we shake. I was just today in a class and people were crying, and I was really experiencing how much I love to hear people cry, because I know something is being broken up, something is being released in the crying. And so I read this book once from a therapist who said, when you cry, shake your whole body and tone out of your mouth. Like little kids cry that way because they're moving energy. So when that fear moves out, something will replace it. Something bigger than you will replace it. And what will that be over time? You know, just as long as it, many times as it takes, this understanding of being on the side of life, this understanding that who you really are is untouched, will emerge. And that sense of self, which is the capital S, the higher self, that's the initiation to make the leap into your higher self, into your higher knowing. And at that point, it's not going to be just head knowledge of something that I read that I'm repeating back. It's going to start getting embodied. The more that you experience it, and life is honorable in that way, it will shock you and shock you and shock you. But those shocks will then deepen you. It will ground you if you allow it, because we have choice here. We can spin out and we can try to protect ourselves through controlling or through anti-control, which is like a more reckless behavior, almost like fuck you life kind of behavior. Or we can use it to make friends with life, to really feel the grief of the moment. We'll let it wash over us. Keep it moving. And then what replaces that is this soft, subtle awareness of the divine, of God, Goddess consciousness. And that is the journey of awakening. Now, in the Gene Key in 51, awakening, Richard Rudd says, is a kind of binary awakened or not awakened approach. You know, I can't really comment on that because in my experience, it's been a path. And I imagine that could be this moment of the lights just go on. Adyashanti says that awakening is spontaneous, but it's not haphazard. So I love holding the juxtaposition because awakening is non-causal. It's like a miracle. We can't cause a miracle because that would be like knowing the forces of the miracle. But we have a say. We can open to the miracle. We can ask for the miracle and be in the listening of the miracle. And we can clean up the vessel of lack of integrity, shadow patterns. You know, we can do the work and clean up the vessel to receive the miracle, but it's non-causal. And that's the thing to notice about when we have that shock, World 48, as I was mentioning, the biosphere, which can be an elegant life here, full of art galleries, museums, and the high life, but it's not conscious. When we have that shock point, we have the choice, the wormhole, to move into World 24. World 24 is the imaginal world. That's the world of non-causal possibility. That's the world of miracles. And in that world, they occur. And yet we are an actor in our play. So one of the things that the teachings in this tradition say is that purity of heart is the price of admission for World 24. So we can take these things and notice that they're not haphazard, but they are spontaneous. And we don't know the day or the hour that will occur for us. And we're putting ourselves in this eclipse time in an alignment with the consciousness on the planet in a collective way that wants to awaken to itself. So imagine that who you are, who I am as consciousness, wants to awaken to itself. It wants to see itself. And so that's the core of intimacy. Why did consciousness, like disguise itself in a million trillion gazillion pieces called you and me and a rock and a screen door and a camera because of intimacy. That's the parable. It's just a story, but think of it as a koan, a parable. If God, Goddess, oneness wanted to know itself, it would have to break itself up into a gazillion pieces because oneness can't know itself. And so oneness bakes in the codes of returning back to itself. And one of the codes, well, it's all the gene keys, the 64 transmissions, but gene key 51, the code is through shock, through that portal, that wormhole of initiation. You are being initiated. And so let me say a word about that. Once you're initiated, you are now required to walk your highest timeline. You're required to walk your highest timeline. That's the path of who you really are. And so it leaves the path of following others. It leaves the path of knowing where the next step is. And I think this is a beautiful message for most people right now who are awakening, because it's scary as crap to walk into the unknown and really know that you're creating a different kind of business. You're bringing through a different healing modality. You're really called. I mean, yesterday I was sitting with someone in their Saturn return who's really getting a very deep message that her purpose will awaken for a new earth. She doesn't know what that really means. So she has to step into the unknown. Can you relate to that? In what way can you relate to that? I would love for you to put it in the comments, because we're having to do this at whatever level we are playing at. And it is so scary and hard and nerve-wracking to be walking in the unknown. You just want a freaking manual sometimes. Just tell me what to do. Nope. Listen. Just listen deeply. And yep, you might fail, because that's going to be part of it. That may be the shock that's necessary to open you even further. That's initiation. That's the gift of initiation. So if you have a birthday around this eclipse, you get this double whammy of initiation. So your life is really poised to never be the same. I mean, all of our lives at this point are poised to never be the same. And you can check out my eclipse videos for more on that. I'm going to end this transmission here and allow you to really just sink into the contemplation of the shocks that you have gone through in your life that have led you to an initiation of a spiritual path, that have put you on a path that was unlike anything in your family and put you on completely new territory. And yes, it gave you friends, because we're here to do this in community, but you still get to be you and a separate individual running the current of energy through you in community. And so how is that waking you up to the truth of who you really are? That's the question of this eclipse through the lens of Gene Key 51. And I hope you enjoyed this message. I would love to hear what's happening for you. Put it in the comments, and I'll see you on the next video.